Hello, and you are listening to Eco Justice Radio. We present environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Welcome, I'm Jack Eit. On today's show, Becoming a Good Relative, A Journey of Truth and Healing, host Carrie Kim will be interviewing Hilary Giovale, author and advocate for reconnecting with your ancient roots and honoring the land where you live and its people. Hilary Giovale is a mother, author, and community organizer who holds a master's degree in good and sustainable communities. She has taught improvisational dance and has served on the boards of philanthropic, human rights, and environmental organizations. She is the author of Becoming a Good Relative, Calling White Settlers Toward Truth, Healing, and Repair from Green Writers Press.
Aloha, this is Carrie Kim. Listeners, we are grateful to have mother, writer, community organizer, and author Hilary Giovale joining us today to share her book, Becoming a Good Relative, Calling White Settlers to Truth, Healing, and Repair. She joins us today to share this book and her journey to truth, reconciliation, reparations, and reconnection to her own ancestors and also many Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island as a quote-unquote white settler. We thank the Tongva ancestors for their enduring presence, legacy, and profound relationship to this region. Our show comes to you from the ancestral homelands of the Tongva and all of their relatives. And we invite you to align with them and to support the many original tribal nations, their homelands, and life waves wherever you live. Act with and for their continuance. Our times call for actions, especially on behalf of Native peoples of this and every continent. Welcome, Hilary. Mahalo for joining us on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Carrie. It's wonderful to be with you.
First, I want to thank you for the courage to embark on this journey and to heed the call of your ancestors. We know this is your first book, but it was an imperative book that they wanted you to write. We live in an ancient future, and it is rising, and it also implores us to honor the ancestors, those of our own heritages, our lineages, and those of the lands we inhabit. Anyone now settled on Turtle Island is being called to acknowledge the original peoples of the lands and to engage and participate in collectively creating a harmonious future for future generations that is willing to penetrate the historical harms of the past in order to move forward in a good and honest way. Many listeners are already well aware of the genocide committed against Indigenous peoples, buffalo or bison, and the living beings of Turtle Island, the histories of stolen land, and the extreme consequences wrought by the Doctrine of Discovery, manifest destiny, and enslavement. These attempts to erase sacred peoples and their cultures in favor of an extractive economy and mindset has come at the expense of wonderment, awe, heart connection, and care for all life. What is ours to do now? What is ours to heal, repair, and reclaim in the long aftermath? How to restore and renew this world so that all living beings thrive. Hilary Giovale joins us today to share how we might embark upon the journey of truth, healing, and repair, particularly for white settlers upon Turtle Island. Are we honoring and giving back to the Indigenous ancestors and peoples of the lands where we now live? Are we living in entitlement or sacred reciprocity? Do we know where we come from and where we are headed? How might we consciously choose to live on behalf of all life as a true relative? So, Hilary, I'm wondering if you could first share the whispers of the ancestors that inspired your book.
I would love to, Carrie. And also, I really want to thank you for the framing you just offered, because everything you just said is really everything that I understand the situation to be. So thank you for validating my understanding.
Mm.
And and yes, I would love to share about the whispers that first sparked this work for me.
Mhm.
One thing that happened was that I was at home one evening cooking dinner,
Mhm.
and suddenly a very big piece of furniture fell
Mm.
down
Mm.
and projected a bunch of items all the way across the room.
Okay.
And my son had been trying to get a pencil out of the drawer of that dresser, and
Mm.
I couldn't understand how the dresser had fallen over so dramatically, and all of these things had flown around the room without breaking.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And so I called up Yeye Louisa Tish, whom I had recently met,
Mhm.
and I told her about it, and she said, "Your ancestors are trying to contact you."
Mhm.
And she
Mhm.
gave me a ritual to do,
Mhm.
which I did. And as a result of that ritual, I began working with an ancestor altar.
Okay.
And shortly after that, I had, the information landed in my hands that I had ancestors who had immigrated here to Turtle Island beginning in 1739 from the Scottish Highlands. And
Mhm.
so this chain of events that seemed, a little bit mysterious and strange at first eventually became this body of work to look at that material of my ancestors being early colonizers and eventually enslavers as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, well, I wanted to actually go back because I recognize that we didn't acknowledge the place where you are. And just given the nature of your work and the book, if you would like to acknowledge where you are coming from
Yes,
today, that would be
yes, I would love
great for you.
to. I am on Hopi, Havasupai, Dene, Apache, Pueblo land, as well as many other nations. We are in what is today called Northern Arizona at the foot of a sacred mountain of kinship.
Mhm.
And I have lived here for over 30 years. And when I moved here as a college freshman, I didn't understand anything about this mountain or this land or the original peoples of this land. But I do believe that this mountain has been working on me all
Mm.
that time.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
and I really honor and claim and acknowledge her as one of the most important teachers in my life.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for recognizing, it's something that we all need to do, actually, especially those of us living here on Turtle Islands, but everywhere. It's something that we used to know how to do, but it's something that we've been divorced from over the ages. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about this relationship with Yeye, Louisa Tish, and how she also supported you in the writing of this book, because your book was your first book. It wasn't like you were already an author, but it was something that was really being compelled by your ancestors and the way it began. But I know that that support, initial support, and throughout was also helpful for you.
Yes, oh yes. Yeye offered so much support. And in fact, this book wouldn't exist without her friendship and her encouragement,
Mhm.
because it was after I found out that some of my ancestors were here much earlier than I had ever known and taking part in, the colonial land grab and enslavement. I again reached out to Yeye for spiritual guidance, and she performed a divination.
Mm-hmm.
And in that divination, she heard, "Your ancestors are talking about a book that is already written." And I
Mm-hmm.
said, "I haven't written a book." And
Right.
honestly, I had no desire to write one. But
Yeah.
but she said, they're telling me that the book is written and you need to get out of the way. And
Mm-hmm.
so I knew, I had a hunch of what the book was about, and I was really scared to write it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I told her that. I told her all of my reasons that there was no way I could write the book, and I'm not the person to do this, and I'm not qualified.
Right, right, right.
And she listened very patiently to me, and then she said, "Okay, well, yeah, but you're going to write it though." And
Mm-hmm.
she gave me some writing prompts and a deadline, and that was how it got started.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And did that continue like that, that she was kind of guiding you along the way, or did at some point you kind of were just able to just work with the ancestors and it was coming through, as you say, it was already a written book. Already.
Yeah, throughout the years, she did provide editorial guidance throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way, also, I received help from many other readers as well, because, you know, one of the things about whiteness and settler colonialism is that it tends to kind of dumb us down a little bit. And I was aware that I needed a lot of help and a lot of input and a lot of feedback from the communities that I am talking about in this book, because there's a lot of things that I don't understand.
Right.
So I did receive that help from many people, and I'm very grateful for that too.
I wonder if you could speak about that, speak about the whiteness, speak about white privilege. How would you define that? What is this animal?
Yeah, well, white privilege to me is it's a system of benefiting from white supremacy,
Mhm.
systemic white supremacy. So those of us who have fair skin and present as white, identify as white, we tend to be privy to all kinds of advantages that others don't receive,
Mhm.
educational and medical and healthcare and you name it, really everything, financial,
Mhm.
um, social advantages. And, it affects all of us differently depending on class, gender, a whole bunch of other varieties of, factors. But still, it does benefit all of us in some way or another. And but it also, I mean, one thing a lot of people know about white privilege already, but one thing I really wanted to explore in this book is something that I ended up calling white peril, which
Mhm.
is the concept that even though many of us have got all this privilege, it's also coming at a great cost.
Right, sure.
And it's not working for us either in a lot of ways.
Well, it's keeping everybody separate in that
Hmm.
sense, but on many levels. I wonder, so we can know about white privilege or whiteness, but then what to do about that is the thing, because many people are privileged, or maybe it's sort of like a subconscious privilege, and then what is owed for that privilege, or what needs to be done about that is the question.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course that's going to be different for every single person, but it's important for us to even acknowledge it because I know some people will just say that they don't feel privileged, but it's because if you're the one already benefiting, you may not even realize a lot of the ways that you benefit if you've never experienced, specific acts of racism or systemic racism. I mean, there's so many things that um, many of us have experienced.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, I think it tends to kind of put the blinders on us, and it can keep us, ignorant about some of the things that are going on around us. Unless we really make a concentrated effort to look and see and understand things differently, it's very easy for us to just pretend it's not happening.
Yeah, it's easy to live in denial, right?
Hmm.
I mean, could you speak about that moment when you discovered that some of your own ancestors had benefited from land grants, stolen land, and literally enslaved people? I saw the document that where they actually had the numbers. Maybe you could speak about that.
For sure. Yeah. That night, it was the last night of 2015, New Year's Eve.
Hmm.
And I opened the book and saw all of this, and it was like overnight, the bubble that I had been living in, the bubble of settler ignorance and innocence, these stories that I had been immersed in my entire life telling me, "Oh, well, it's not your fault. You weren't here. Your people didn't do any of those bad things. You're just an innocent, you know, descendant of Northern Irish immigrants from 3 or 4 generations ago, right?"
Right.
And all of a sudden, all of that just got taken apart and dismantled, and I was left looking at this stark reality, and I was sickened. I was absolutely sickened by it, and shocked, and just um undone. I was just, all I could do was just stare at the ceiling for hours, and then I had the very first conversation about it with my family the next morning and realized that um, it had been known in the family for decades, and that but no one was talking about it, and no one was looking at it, and it landed on me all at once at that time. I'm the ninth generation on that side of the family. My children are the 10th,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to do something about this. I'm compelled to look at this. It hasn't been looked at for 9 generations, and that's going to stop with me, and my children will know about
Mm-hmm.
this.
And how has that journey been with your children? I mean, what have you told them about it, or what kind of accountability do they feel, or,
It's amazing because they were pretty young when this happened. I believe they were probably 7 and 12,
hmm
and uh, they grew up with it,
hmm
and they have so much capacity to understand. Like
hmm
this movement to, protect children from hearing colonial histories in school, etc., I just
uh-huh.
think is laughable.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because because if you explain these things to children in a sensitive way, in a way that makes space for the fullness of their humanity to coexist with this reality, then they are completely capable of handling this information.
hmm
And, they're growing up now, and I see them walking in the world with this knowing in a way that is grounded.
hmm
They are not overcome by shame. And they each in their own ways are doing things to be accountable to the legacy that they were born into. And it's just a beautiful thing for me to watch in my kids.
hmm Is it something that you think other parents, depending on how they're educated at schools around what's happened here, they may not know the true histories. They may know kind of a whitewashed version of the history of the quote unquote United States, and then how to reckon with that, the things that they learn in school that might be different than, conventional school.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think all parents can talk to their children about this. Yeah, even if the schools aren't allowed to do it anymore, we need to create a culture of openness about this. Hmm.
And it begins with the children, of course,
Hmm.
so that they carry forward a different way of being, of learning how to become generous and connected human beings. I wonder if you could speak about this term and ancestral amnesia and why it is important to undo the amnesia, come out of the amnesia, and actually remember.
Yeah, that first day of 2016, when I started talking to my family, and I realized that we were in a collective state of amnesia about our history. And at first I was, I had emotional reactions about that, like why don't you guys know? Why aren't we talking about this? But then over time, I realized this is a collective state of amnesia that many white people, white families, white communities are in. This is how we have been acculturated to, we have been taught and trained and indoctrinated into behaving this way. And
Mhm.
and it's part of, the social norms that we grow up with and are immersed in about. It's considered impolite to talk about these things. It's considered, oh, well, that's all in the past. You don't need to feel guilty about that. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I've heard that,
That's a real
it,
common one, I know.
yeah. And so it's part of our way of being and moving through the world. And we do have the capacity to change that, one
Mhm.
conversation at a time, one relationship at a time, one project at a time. We can change our culture into something different.
Mhm. So, Hillary, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll come back to that and speak a little bit more about ancestral amnesia.
You are listening to Eco Justice Radio, a listener-supported media outlet. Please consider making a donation to ensure we can continue to provide socially and environmentally driven content. Donations can be made at ecojusticeradio.org and socal350.org. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/EcoJusticeRadio. Today you're listening to Becoming a Good Relative, a Journey of Truth and Healing with host Carrie Kim and guest Hilary Giovale, author and advocate for reconnecting with your ancient roots and honoring the land where you live and its people.
Listeners, we are back with Hilary Giovale, author of Becoming a Good Relative, and we are talking about ancestral amnesia. And so, Hilary, as we know, well, I don't know what's happened within your family. For I know I read in your book about your father, how he was kind of more in that dismissive, like, oh, that's a long time. That was just the norm of the past. It's not really, we have no responsibility to it now. Right. So I don't know what you say to people who have that view, because it is easy to dismiss, deny, and feel that there is no need to bring the past into the present to make the future.
Yeah, that's a reality in our country right now. And many of us have built up a very complex, elaborate system of defenses to deflect that conversation and not allow it to penetrate into our minds. Um,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and so, you know, I've come to the place of I've realized that not everyone is ready to have that conversation, and to try to force that conversation creates a lot of backlash that can be very difficult. And so
Yeah.
I mostly focus on working with groups and people who are ready to have that conversation,
Hmm.
because we need to build our connectivity, we need to build our community, and we need to be like a groundswell coming up together with new ways
Hmm.
of doing and being. And I really feel that this is how the culture changes over time, is by encouraging
Hmm.
where the growth is ready to happen.
Right. Where the people are already voluntarily engaging this, right? Seeking
Right.
after it. What
Yeah.
is remembering? And you make that hyphen, remembering, because I know you've also talked about, finding belonging, because most of the people who are settlers here, of course, are orphans from their own homelands, from their own indigenous traditions. So if you could speak about that, remembering.
Yeah, I think one of the effects of settler colonialism, as you mentioned, is we are disconnected from our roots. And many of us don't even value our roots anymore. Like those of us who came from Europe, there are a lot of us who descend from legacies of unbelievable centuries of war, centuries
Hmm.
of our ancestors being pushed off their land, centuries of having their cultures and their languages demonized and disparaged by patriarchal
Hmm.
religious institutions, etc. And we come from
Hmm.
traumatic legacies. And so our people, in many cases, came over here as refugees to seek safety and better ways of life and opportunities. And in the process of assimilating into whiteness, many of us forgot. We forgot where we came from, who we came from, and the fact that our people were once earth honoring people and indigenous people too. And so
Hmm.
when I think about re-membering, it's a lot about reclaiming these pieces of ourselves that have been cut off and fragmented, and putting ourselves back together as a package that is capable of holding all of this complexity over millennia, and holding that knowledge of the past as we work together to co-create better and more equitable futures.
Well, you had spoken about the witch burnings in Europe and how that helped you in reconciliation with your ancestors. I wonder if you could speak more about the witch burnings, and this goes back to all the things you were saying about the European peoples who were deeply oppressed before coming here, like you said, between language, being, having being pushed off of land, starvation, famine, so many things, religious persecution. If you could go into that as far as yeah.
Yeah, there is a note, a historical note in the back of the book where I did a deep dive into the history of the European witch burnings,
Mhm.
and they were happening, for many, many centuries, but then the most concentrated ones happened in the early modern era. And the most concentrated regions of those burnings during that time were in Scotland and Germany. And that is where my mother's side comes from Germany, my father's side comes from Scotland. And
Mm,
so I couldn't help but think, this was laying the groundwork for them before they came over. And these witch hunts were they involved so much of the community's time, labor, investment, infrastructure,
mhm,
resources, etc., that when you read about them, you realize everybody must have been affected in one way or the other.
mhm,
You realize there were children who were watching their aunties and grandmothers and mothers being burned alive.
mhm,
And there were men watching their wives and sisters and daughters. And
mhm,
and when you think about the impacts of, what is the word? Vicarious trauma, when you witness a traumatic event, that is just unthinkable that
mhm,
that
mhm,
that was going on in such a concentrated way for, I believe that period was about 150 years where it was going on. We're talking about generations. And so, you know, all of that, I feel, in my reading and my studying and the people who have taught me, I've really picked up the belief over time that trauma is carried down through the generations until it reaches a generation that is finally safe enough to look at it and unpack it
mhm, mhm,
and process it and speak about it. And
mhm,
that's how the generations heal, forward and backward. That's
mhm,
what I've been taught. And so I really feel that that's still at work when we see, the patriarchal systems that are around us living large right now.
mhm,
We're still working through that.
mhm, mhm. I actually think we're traumatized by fire, some of us, from that remembrance as well. I mean, it's not a small amount of numbers. In your book, you talked about it was something like 50,000 that were burned. I mean, and it was a public atrocity, like you say. It was a
Right.
public burning. I mean, I think it's very important to understand the gravity of that.
Hmm.
So what of that trauma? I have a mentor, Stephen Jenkinson. He's an author and cultural activist, and he had spoken about by the third generation, the trauma is forgotten because it is so deeply been repressed and it's buried. You really literally, like when you talk about finally there comes a generation willing and safe enough to do it, but you have to go do some deep digging and labor after the trauma in a way
Right.
release it. So if you could talk a little bit more about sort of the physical experiences that you had to undergo, your own healing tears to actually release some of this original trauma.
Yeah. I did a lot of research in terms of reading and studying. I also applied a lot of intuitive processes to all of that. So, for example, if I was reading a book about the witch hunts and I came across an illustration one time that depicted, a woman who was suspended by her arms in a very unnatural position, hanging, intended to dislocate her arms, and a mother watching. And when I came across that illustration, I thought, like, my body started shaking, and
Hmm.
and I felt these tears welling up, and I thought, okay, there's something resonant in my DNA with this image. And so I'm just going to let it move me. And so I really developed a practice of allowing myself to cry and wail and roll around on the floor and, go out in the woods and put my face down in the dirt and let my tears seep into the earth and all kinds of things like that, singing and drumming and dancing and just allowing it to move out of my body.
Hmm.
And I learned some of that because I received trauma therapy after visiting a war zone. And so
Hmm.
I took what I had learned and just applied it to this historical trauma as well.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. I mean, what do you recommend for people who are encountering that? within themselves, just to follow their own intuitive guidance. I mean, any suggestions for people who know or may feel that it is kind of trapped in their cells?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's like the way out is through.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us are afraid to do that because we're afraid to feel the feelings. We're afraid to face the grief and the profound, sense of injustice and fear and terror and all the things that come up. But many of us, not all, but many of us are safe enough now. We do have the stability now to face that and to go through it. And there is something so magical that comes on the other side of walking through all of that pain.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a feeling of lightness and liberation and joy and possibility that comes by embracing what has happened to our people and
Mm-hmm.
saying, we are going to do things differently now.
Hmm. Hmm. And what of all the grief or the honoring? I mean, do you feel that that's something that has to continue, the honoring? Just like I think of Indigenous peoples who have gatherings or rituals around like original traumas that have happened, and they go back every year to honor those ancestors who were killed and to mourn them and to uplift their remembrance of them, you know.
Right. Actually, for me personally, I went through that for several years and then it felt like it was closed.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so that's what again, with intuition, I sensed, okay, this is closed now and we are moving on. And I did receive dreams and, readings from intuitive people and other signs to let me know it's finished and we
Hmm.
are ready to move on.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm.
Could you speak about some of the many relationships that you cultivated during the time of writing this book with Indigenous peoples? And how were you consulting with them? How were you encountering them? Were you seeking them out? I mean, what was that process? Because you've have many, many who have given, written testimonials about your book.
Yeah, I have been so blessed to have those relationships. I mean, this whole process couldn't have happened without those friendships and mentorships and it started around, let's see, around 2014 is when I started building relationships with the Indigenous community where I live. And it was crazy because at that time I had already been living here for 20 years.
Right.
And I had no idea what they had been through.
Hmm.
No idea. I was just struck over and over again that we were living in complete segregation
Yes.
and that I had willfully ignored them and the history that they
Hmm.
experienced here. And so I began reaching out and, building bridges and making relationships. And I would encourage everybody to do that. If there is a marginalized community near your home in your community, I encourage people to find out how they can be of service. And a lot of times it's very humble. It looks like, asking permission to show up at a meeting and
Hmm.
then sitting with the question, how, if at all, can I help? And
Hmm.
waiting to receive an answer, not jumping in to fix and save and be prescriptive, but waiting and listening for what wants to happen. And food is very helpful in building relationships. Sitting down and sharing a meal together is so valuable.
Hmm.
And just putting one foot in front of the other and moving at the speed of trust.
I like that. Were you finding that you were being similar? Were they embracing you back? Was that more of a longer process to, you know, bring you into any kind of circles or to engage with you? Because oftentimes there is sort of a, maybe on the surface they will engage with you, but it's not really a deep relationship. So if you could speak about how that was to cultivate truly genuine relationship.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, I remember definitely getting teased a lot in the beginning. And that's fair game.
Yeah, being the brunt of the joke, right?
You
You have to
know?
be willing to do that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I mean that teasing, I think teasing and humor tends to be a very important part of Indigenous culture.
Sure. Yeah.
And it serves a really important role because
Mhm.
it can be a little bit of a mirror, like, oh wow, this is how I'm appearing right now. This is how this is coming across.
Yeah. And if you
And
get
so to
triggered.
yeah, so to go along and laugh, be willing to laugh at the joke and laugh at yourself, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
that happened, and yes, it took years. And I would say the main thing is to just be consistent, to keep showing up no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it appears that you have nothing to offer, just continuing to show up is so important because a lot of us, we get discouraged, we feel uncomfortable, we don't understand the social norms, and so we just vanish.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a pattern that is well established that we need to stop doing.
Right. Well, it's uncomfortable. I think you spoke about that. You have to be willing to be a bit uncomfortable in the
That's
process.
right. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And actually, that discomfort, I think, is a sign that you're in the right place.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's being able to sit through the discomfort until it's no longer a discomfort,
Right.
But you have to, that's a labor in itself.
That's right.
I wonder if you
Yeah.
could speak about a bit about cultural identity and how that extends beyond just racial identity.
Mm. Do you mean like specifically for white people?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I've been in a process, and this was because one of my readers several years ago said to me, you can't write this book without writing about reclaiming some of your European ancestral identity.
Hmm.
And I remember saying to her, well, I can't. I have no idea how to do that. And it doesn't exist and all the excuses, right? And she said, just try. And, I received that insight from many people who were helping on the book. And so I began studying Gaelic and Irish songs that are
Hmm.
old songs that,
Hmm.
go back, who knows, hundreds of years in
Hmm.
some cases. And I began doing a lot of reading about the traditions in the ancestral lands that my people came from.
Hmm.
And it created this bubbling up of this feeling of belonging over
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
especially with the songs, because I could see, oh my gosh, my Celtic ancestors really knew how to revere the apple tree as a source
Hmm.
of wisdom,
Right.
and they knew how to bless themselves and protect themselves with fire on the cross quarter days and things like that.
Right.
And so,
Honoring the
although
people.
there's
Hmm.
no way to go back and put an intact Celtic culture together
Right.
in this time and place, there are elements that I have pulled from their knowings and their practices into the present day. And that has really been the beginning of a new cultural identity for me, where I still know that I'm white and I have to be accountable to my white privilege. And I feel very much connected to my ancestors and how they used to move and operate.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, how are you knowing this and having gone through this process of reclaiming? How do you make yourself accountable? What are the ways that you do that to make yourself accountable for the white privilege, for the whiteness, the those things that you benefit from still, even today, even if you weren't trying to, you would be benefiting because that's the way
Right,
this culture exists right now, just in the
right.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, one of the ways is that I have developed a personal reparations plan,
Hmm.
which I have facilitated for groups, and I'd be happy to send you. I've got a Google Doc that's a guide on how to do that,
Yeah,
and
we
it's
can.
open to everyone to use.
Hmm.
And so my family is deeply immersed in our reparations plan. And a lot of our plan, because of the unique position that we find ourselves in, has to do with redistributing wealth and
Right.
redistributing money and resource. And so we are constantly in dialogue, in community, and relationship around that.
Hmm.
And that is one of the ways that we seek accountability. And then also I think just continuing to be in relationship with people, continuing to make the time to sit together, to talk, to ask for feedback, you know, to hear each other. And that's another form.
Hmm. Hmm. And you give back from this book. I mean, right?
That's right.
All
Yeah.
of the proceeds from the book go back for reparations. Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Listeners, we're going to take a break right now, and Hilary will come back to talk about accumulated wealth.
You are listening to Eco Justice Radio, a listener-supported media outlet. Please consider making a donation to ensure we can continue to provide socially and environmentally driven content. Donations can be made at ecojusticeradio.org and socal350.org. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/ecojusticeradio. Today you're listening to Becoming a Good Relative, a Journey of Truth and Healing with host Carrie Kim and guest Hilary Giovale, author and advocate for reconnecting with your ancient roots and honoring the land where you live and its people.
So listeners, we are back with Hilary Giovale to talk about accumulated wealth, because we know much of the wealth here on Turtle Island has been accumulated through land, treating land as a commodity to be bought and sold. So I wonder what you have to say about the land back movement, just the ways that this continues today uh, with land. And there is so much accumulated wealth that way. And even though there'll be many people who say, oh, I care about Indigenous peoples, I care about the histories, but they'll hold on to their land and there's no signs of them giving any of it up. So how do we move through that? And I know you say, it's a matter of willingness, and some people will be willing, and maybe over time they're willing, but it's just something to address and to acknowledge. And there's contradictions there. They
Yeah,
abound.
absolutely. I remember when I first started hearing about land back and land tax. Those to me are kind of, sisters to each
Mhm.
other.
Uh-huh.
And my first reaction was that I felt a lot of resistance and I felt threatened by it.
Uh-huh.
And so that feeling made me think, okay, I need to be curious about this because this is a really strong reaction. And
Uh-huh.
so I spent some time, listening to Indigenous speakers and reading about that movement and learning about it. And over time, as I did my own spiritual work, I
Mm-hmm.
realized that that fear and that resistance, it comes from the reality that my ancestors were once pushed off their land in
Mm-hmm.
Europe. And as a result of that, being disenfranchised, being orphaned, being homeless, they came over here and out of fear took other people's land.
Right.
So that was one thing I realized, and the other, was just that that fear is still there's some remnant, ancestral remnant that's still active. There's a
Uh-huh.
fear of being pushed out, of being homeless, of being, you
Of
know,
losing.
yes, yes. And
Mhm.
so once I saw that fear, and once I began listening to more Indigenous speakers, and I realized I the people that I have listened to I've heard all of them say, we are not asking you guys to give up your homes and go back to Europe.
Right.
Like, and
Right.
so that really calmed me down.
Mhm.
That helped me to relax and go, okay, I can still live here. I can stay in my house, right? But then to realize what they're talking about is, you know, the redistribution of, for example, national parks and lands that have been passed down through families and are maybe heading into the next generation, but they could be diverted and go to the Indigenous community, or lands that have been held by institutions, etc. And so it's kind of, again, it's a both and, where what I've heard is that we are not being asked to leave here,
Mhm.
actually, but we are being asked to step up and become good relatives to this place.
Mhm.
And we can do that by taking part in, monthly recurring donations to land tax programs. I
Mhm.
have a link on my website with all the ones I know about.
Mhm.
And we can also do it by supporting land rematriation projects.
Mhm. Mhm. Could you talk about that rematriation, how some of the Indigenous elders or community leaders that you have worked with speak about rematriation?
Yeah, I have a friend named Daisy Purdy who gave me a beautiful example that came from her auntie, which is all about returning the stewardship of Mother Earth to herself,
Mm-hmm.
And so there are lots of different ways that it can be defined and explained. And I was on a call one time with a bunch of Indigenous women who work on rematriation, and they made it very clear rematriation is Indigenous women's work. That is not something that, I can claim as my own work at all.
Mm-hmm.
But it really, for me, what I've observed at least is that it really ties back to the principles of women's leadership that are held in common by many indigenous cultures. That is a common way of being that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those cultures have held throughout time, that, women have the final say in how things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, that has been interrupted by settler colonialism that is so entwined with patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
But in a lot of cases, that's still there for them. That knowing is still there, and those women are ready to step up and lead the return of land back to herself
Mm-hmm.
as stewards and as respectful relatives to the land.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there anything you'd like to elaborate on with patriarchy, especially when we go back to Europe and the way things were for women back in the day? But we know that that has a great deal to do with the way things are today. And
Yeah, I feel like today we are seeing, patriarchy on steroids. And it is just out of hand. But in some
I mean,
ways,
yes and no, right? It's both and because those
right,
things are happening, not only that, right?
right. Yeah. And so, I mean, patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, they all go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't really have one without the other.
Mm-hmm.
And, in some ways, I wish it weren't happening the way it was, but in some ways I think, well, maybe we can be grateful it's happening this way, because it is so ugly and so grotesque, and it's up in everyone's face so much that maybe we will actually begin to turn the tide with this now. Patriarchy has been, developing for a long, long time, thousands of years, and it needs to stop. It needs to
Mm-hmm.
transform.
Yeah. Well, it is a relationship to Mother Earth, right? The way we treat Mother Earth is how we treat the mothers of the world. And so until we see actually that honoring of the matriarchal and the maternal instincts, I don't mean just like in the figure of a person, but our instincts and aspects, then we will have the world that we have, right?
That's right. Yeah.
What would you say was the most challenging part of your journey of this truth and reconciliation, healing and repair?
Hmm. Wow. That's a good question. I mean, it has been very challenging. It's been very challenging, all of
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
you
That's why
know?
most people don't undertake it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a fewer and farther between someone who's undergone the kind of journey you have and the
Yeah.
extensiveness. How?
Yeah. I would say probably one of the most challenging things was my own self-doubt, dealing with that. Because I questioned over and over for years
Mhm.
about, do I have the right to say these things? Have I learned enough to say these things? Do I have enough credibility? Who am I to write about this? I'm not even a writer,
Right. Mhm.
And so I that fear threatened to shut it down many, many times.
Mhm.
And eventually, I think really through the relationships that I have, I received the blessing and the courage enough times to go, okay, even if it's not perfect, and it's not,
Mhm.
definitely not perfect,
Mhm.
even if it's not complete and whole and the final word, and it's not,
Right.
I have to do it. I have to put this out there,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
knowing that
Yeah.
it will continue to evolve and grow, and I will find mistakes that I've made, and I will have to apologize, and that's okay.
Right. It's okay to just to not be perfect as we know, because it
Yeah.
is highly beneficial, all the things, especially because it is a personal journey. And actually even more so because you do have that ancestral connection of there actually were people who enslaved other people and that your family benefited from those original stolen lands.
Yeah.
We've talked about a little bit about that accumulation of wealth through land, but it is an issue. It's a huge issue as long as we continue to value land with a dollar sign.
Hmm.
Not undoing whether or not we speak about, oh, just give back the national parks, give back institutional land, but it's at some point it's not enough because the economy and inherited wealth is built upon land as commodity, land is traded, and exchanged as an asset, as the way that people inherit wealth. So it seems that there has to be a real disruption of that whole notion. Maybe the land trust and the land tax is a start to that, but until we really create a different way or different economy, I wonder what you would like to say about that.
Yeah, that is such a good question. Exactly. It's kind of like we're looking across this big chasm right now where we see what needs to happen, but we're not there yet, right? We're still working within this economy that is really based on extraction and was built completely intertwined with the institution of slavery and stolen land as well.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, what I really take hope and encouragement from is, for example, there is a organization called the Center for Ethical Land Transition. It
Mhm.
is run by a woman named Cassandra Ferreira, who is, I think she describes herself as a reformed real estate agent. So
Right.
she has taken all of her know-how in this system of valuing land as a commodity, and now she is applying those skills to land back projects. So
Hmm.
this is an example of where we have to bridge the old
Right.
reality with the new in order
Hmm.
to create where we're going.
Yeah. And I think it's also expanding the mindset because, as you say, we've been indoctrinated to think that is the way forward or the way that you pass on for your inheritance. But we have to look further than that and realize, oh, it could actually be better, way, 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 way better than what we have now.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
that's that visioning and that dreaming of the new world that you talk about from the Achuar and Ecuador. And, you know, um, I wonder if there's anything more you'd like to say. We talked about the witch burnings, we talked about the violence, because many people really do not understand the extreme violence that your ancestors, the Irish, the Scottish, the Vikings colonizing Scotland. I mean, all these different things that had happened. Um, and how important it is to talk about and address this cycle of violence, which is perpetuated today. And what do you feel is really the key to breaking these cycles of violence that really keep us paralyzed in old paradigms?
Yeah. I feel one of the key things that people can do if they feel any kind of resonance or draw toward this
Mhm.
is to, first of all, find out where your people came from, if you can, and then begin doing some reading about what was going on at different points in history to kind of familiarize yourself with the context. And then, I love to help people create ancestor altars, which
Mhm.
can be very simple, can be as simple as creating a designated space in your house that has a place to sit and a little table. Put a cloth down, put a candle, maybe a bowl of water, and maybe some plants or some flowers, and begin reaching out to your ancestors and asking them to help you understand what it is that's needed in the family line. And then
Mhm.
paying attention to intuition, to dreams, to books that fall off the shelf and people that cross your path and synchronicities and um and knowing that you can trust that. You can trust those ways of knowing to help you understand what has happened to your people and where they are asking you to go.
Mhm.
I've heard it said by many by spiritual traditions of various kinds that the ancestors are willing to help us, but they cannot do it without our consent. And
Mhm.
so, you know, asking them to help, asking them to make you aware and show you what you need to see is very helpful. And that's a way to begin this process of repair.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what would you like to say? What is required to truly be a good relative now, just from your own perspective and the journey that you've undergone?
Yeah. Well, I think each one of us has an individual answer to that question because the truth is that it comes from within.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the thing that speaks to your heart
Mm-hmm.
and the thing that moves you. So I can give an example. What is moving for me right now is that I recently found out that, the work to document the boarding schools in the United States and collect oral histories was defunded.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I found that out, that moved me. That moved me to my core. And so I'm collaborating with a small group of Native women to begin a process of educating the public and raising those funds. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, that's what being a good relative looks like in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really because that particular issue is so, so compelling to my heart. So
Uh-huh.
I think for everybody else, we all have something like that, whether
Right.
it's, the well-being of the waters
Mm-hmm.
or climate change
Mm-hmm.
or youth or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the issue is that is really deeply important, rising up and meeting that issue and coming forward in support and in kinship around that issue, that's how we become a good relative right now.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could share, thank you for that. From that, I wanted to ask you, there's kind of a theme in the weaving, and there's seven things. I wonder if you could talk about those seven things that come up in the weaving.
Yeah. Yeah, the book is divided into three parts. The first one is spinning the thread, the second is weaving, and the third is the fabric.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an example of what I'm saying about intuition and ancestors, because I was just out walking in the woods like I always do, and I heard these instructions that this is how the book has to be organized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
now, even after it's been published, it is coming to me even more. Why? Why did they tell me that? Because I've started studying with a group that studies Nordic and Germanic traditions,
Mm-hmm.
and I've realized that those actions of spinning, weaving, and fabric are directly tied in with the Nordic cosmology, which is
Mm-hmm.
the ancient cosmology of my maternal line.
Right.
And so I had no way of knowing that at the time, but here it
Right.
is. It's
Mm-hmm.
now it's showing up why.
Right. Yeah. Well, and then in the weaving, there are the seven different aspects. So, I'll just mention them if you want, and then
Yeah, please do.
comment. So land, ancestors, water, dreams, philanthropy, fasting ceremony, and indigenous solidarity work. And
Yeah.
that's what you have under weaving. If those are like seven themes that you kept coming back to, or that is essential to just kind of be curious about and inquire into.
Yeah, those really were like the landmarks that guided the whole process. And let's see, what could I say about them? I guess I could just say that it wasn't a linear path. It was
Hmm.
like walking around in a labyrinth or in a spiral where
Right.
you're constantly passing these landmarks over and over, but each time you pass them, they look different.
Hmm.
And they have
Hmm.
something different to
Right.
show
Often,
you.
yeah. Yes, yes. I wonder, and we're just about to wrap, Hillary, but I wonder if you could share any words of encouragement to people who something is speaking to them, even in this interview, or they've been hearing the whispers of their ancestors. I wonder if there's any words of encouragement you have. You did mention about the ancestors altar, but if there's anything else you'd like to share to people who may be in that same place as you, maybe a little bit of trepidation or maybe some intimidation, just what would you like to say to these listeners?
I would just like to encourage you to have courage and know that you can do it. You can do it. And that the rewards on the other side of this tunnel are incredible. and you will really create a different life and a different identity for yourself by walking through this portal that is much more fulfilling and joyful and rewarding in the end.
Thank you so much, Hilary, for sharing that. You shared so much of yourself, and the book is incredible and quite a devotional act to do it. I know it was something that you were called to do, but it also is an act of devotion to actually undergo the process of writing this book and the research that you went into and the relationships you cultivated along the way. I wonder if you could share some of the ways that people can connect with you and to learn about the book. If you could share some of your links.
Yeah, my website is goodrelative.com, and there's a contact form on there if people want to reach out. And I'm also on Instagram at Hilary Giovale author and on Facebook. And I do have an events page on my website that I try to keep updated with what I'm doing. So yeah, I love to hear from people. So feel free to reach out.
Mhm. I see they're becoming kind of a network of resources. Maybe your site is already like that for people that are
Oh,
involved.
yes.
And then
I have
you're
tons of resources on there.
yeah, well, just your bibliography too. There's so many resources that people can kind of go down the deep rabbit hole, as we all need to. So thank you, Hilary, for your commitment to this and for truly listening to the calling of your ancestors. We know that the healing is actually required of probably each and every one of us in this time, and that is how our world will heal and how we do dream in the new world.
Yes, thank you so much, Carrie.
Hey, listeners, to check out the extended recording of this show or to explore our other shows, visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, and subscribe to our podcast. This has been Eco Justice Radio and our show, Becoming a Good Relative, A Journey of Truth and Healing. Thank you to our guest, Hilary Giovale, and thank you to our listeners for joining us. Please connect with us on social media at Eco Justice Radio, SoCal 350, and Wilder Utopia. If you like what you've heard and you want others to be informed, subscribe and share the episodes. You have been listening to Eco Justice Radio, a project of SoCal 350. Executive producer, myself, Jack Eit. Co-host, Jessica Aldridge. Co-host, Carrie Kim. And engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.